remarks are contained in a detailed paper which I believe will be circulated. It speaks in detail and with discipline to the subject. So I'll use this occasion simply to tease out some of the critical issues which I think are important to this conversation. I preface my remarks by saying that when we meet in fora such as this, we are not saying anything new. We are merely reminding ourselves of the things that we ought to do, and we use the occasion to assess whether we have done well or we have not done well. And it is in that spirit that I'll make my remarks on the significance of transboundary cooperation. It is not lost on me that we are saying a deepening such cooperation, which then presupposes that there is some cooperation. We merely want to deepen them. The statistics are known to all of us present in this room. We have nearly 11 lake basins spanning the continent of Africa. We have 19 river basins spanning the continent of Africa. And if one may be dramatic about it, perhaps the Nile Basin is one of the most important of these basins. And we have this conversation because we recognize that if Africa is to realize her goals, particularly sustainable goal number 6, it is important that we collaborate. We have all been told, and we are aware, that of the 17 goals, 13 of them relate to water and sanitation. In fact, one may say all of them relate to water and sanitation. One may say that sustainable development goals are at the very heart of the development of the continent of Africa. Our continent, we all know, continues to punch below her weight in many critical areas, whether it is in the area of providing potable water to our populations, whether it is in the area of feeding ourselves, whether it is in the area of the provision of health, whether it is in the area of the provision of energy to power our industries, whether it is in the area of ensuring that we use our waters for irrigation, there is a sense in which we could do better. And it is not lost on me that when we talk about sustainable development goals, we should also talk about Africa Agenda 2063 and the pillars which undergird Africa Agenda 2063. It is important to remind ourselves in conversations such as this of the reality, because it is very easy at fora such as this, as we ordinarily do, to give statistics. Statistics don't change people's lives. Statistics are good, but the testimony of the man and woman in the Chad Basin is much more germane to this conversation rather than massaged statistics. And that is why, therefore, when we talk about improving transboundary cooperation, we ought to ask ourselves what it is that we want to achieve. Let me start with the Nile Basin, which puts together 10 countries. And let us remember that some of the laws and rules and regulations that continue to govern the Nile Basin were conceived before any of the countries that are members had regained their political independence. It is in that light that you must see the 1929 treaty and the 1949 treaties. When the British were controlling this part of the world, those treaties were enacted in an environment where they deemed this entire territory to be theirs. They did not care what happened in Ethiopia. They did not care what happened in Kenya. They did not care what happened in Uganda. They simply looked at this as a totality which benefited them. When we regained our independence and locked ourselves into these gridlocks, which are now known as sovereign countries, that is when the conflicts emerged. That is when the Ethiopians now said, yes, we are part of the basin, but we want to use the waters in the manner that we deem fit. That is when the Sudanese were saying the same thing. That is when the Ugandans were saying the same things, and the Kenyans and the Rwandese and the Egyptians. We then realized that divided into these little countries as we are, and when we talk about our sovereignty, we may be hurting ourselves. It is in that context that we must therefore see the efforts that have been made to ensure that our national boundaries notwithstanding, we appreciate the fact that waters and rivers and lakes know no boundaries. And that therefore it is incumbent upon us to engage in symbiotic relationship which makes sure that we use those resources in a manner that is beneficial to all of us. We now know, for example, that if Kenya does not use the waters of Lake, I hesitate to call it Victoria, the waters of Lake Victoria should be Narubare or Lolue. I hope and look forward to the day we'll change those names. And we know that if those waters are not used responsibly, then we suffer. I grew up here on the lake, and I remember when we were a little younger, we could actually drink water directly from the lake. I remember the different type of fishes that were there. Today, all those have reduced dramatically, with the consequence that we no longer can trust that our waters are potable, with the consequence is that the lack of potability of that water therefore has increased waterborne diseases, with the consequence that nutrition has gone down because we no longer have fish to eat, with the consequence that we suffer in the totality of the mismanagement of the waters. And therefore, when we talk about deepening relationship, we are talking about responsibility. Responsibility that makes Uganda realize, that makes Tanzania realize, that makes Rwanda and Burundi realize, and the Democratic Republic of Congo realize that we must be our brothers and sisters keepers. And that is how I understand all these treaties and these frameworks, because they help us utilize the waters in a manner that is responsible. Look at the conflict now going on between Egypt and Ethiopia about the Grand Renaissance Dam. Nobody can quarrel with the fact that Ethiopia owes a duty to her national to generate power. Nobody can quarrel with that. Nobody can quarrel with the fact that Ethiopia generating power will then become industrialized and will deal with the issue of quality of life. Nobody can quarrel with that. But the question that we ask in doing that, Does Ethiopia owe a duty of care to Sudan? Yes, she does. Does she owe a duty of care to Egypt? Yes, she does. Does she owe a duty of care to all the Nile Basin countries? Yes, she does. And if she recognizes that she does, what must she do? What she must do is to ensure that she guarantees the other countries the right of using the waters of the Nile in a manner that is beneficial to them, because if they don't behave responsibly, then Egypt will suffer, then Sudan will suffer, then Southern Sudan will suffer. And therefore, when we talk about deepening this transboundary cooperation, we are simply reminding ourselves that indeed what you do does affect your neighbor, and that rivers, as I've already said, and I repeat ad nauseum, do not know boundaries, and we have a duty to use it responsibly. If you go outside of that particular basin which we are familiar with, and you go to the Chad basin, those of you who are familiar with the Chad will know that Lake Chad has shrunk by nearly 90% since 1960. And that has massive implications on a number of things. First of all, water. It's a cliche that water is life. But beyond being a cliche, it is a reality.